Hey y'all, it's Christy from Teadoddles, and today I'm going to be talking about sewing with Crinkle Challis. It's one of those fabrics that can be a little bit tricky to work with when you're sewing. But first, I'd like to say welcome new subscribers, welcome back subscribers. I'm happy to have you here with me in my maker shenanigans. I do like to do the sewing things, the yarny things, and the DIY things, so if you like to make things, you might like it here. All right, Crinkle Challis. This pattern that I'm working on, and now I've done some sewing videos mostly about knits. This particular top is not a knit pattern. This is the Sue Blouse PDF sewing pattern by DG Patterns, and this is a rayon Ditzy floral print crinkle challis. That's what it is. I got this off of Fabric Mart. Yes, that's right, Fabric Mart. So you see that price, $4.99. Not too shabby. So I did get 2 yards of this so I could make my pattern. I'm doing the short sleeve top. You can see it has this little detail where the back comes around to the front. The front is one piece. There's a seam is actually in the back, and so this comes down below the shoulder line and just has a little detail and a little gathered spot right there. So when you're working with these fabrics, I'm going to talk about needle and thread on the machine first. I prefer to use a Microtex needle. It has a sharper point and it tends to get through these fabrics easier without snagging, and that's why I prefer to use a Microtex needle. I have used universal needles. Usually you can get through it fairly decent if you got a new needle in there, but sometimes if you use an older needle, you'll find it catches or it hits. I don't know how it does it, but it'll hit a spot that it doesn't want to go through, and it will snag the fabric. Not a fun thing when you're trying to get through a sewing project. So I prefer Microtex needles. Now I'm going to use a 60/8 size needle. An 80/12 would work great as for this as well, but I don't have any in stock currently in my sewing room. I need to buy some more Microtex needles. But these fabrics, as you can tell, they fray very easily, which is another thing. This one's not quite as bad as some of them. And so for that reason, I am using I have a serger, which I like to use on knits quite a lot because I can just sew and serge all in one point. When I'm dealing with something like this, I don't like using the serger because when you do it, even if you get, you have to fiddle around with the serger a little bit to get a tight enough thing to keep these little pieces in. And honestly, I can't be bothered because it annoys me, but that's my preference. But also, I prefer to use a French seam on fabrics like this. It just makes a neater seam. You don't have to worry about all this stuff coming loose. And for me personally, it is a stronger seam and it makes the garment last longer when you're dealing with a lightweight fabric like this. So that is my personal preference. And I will talk about the French seam shortly. But first I'm going to talk about this gather. This is one of the back pieces, and this is the front. You can see it's a little longer. You got to gather this up to make it fit. I did do 2 lines of stitching about 1/8 of an inch apart. You can see it's not exact. It doesn't matter. Because I can remove those stitches later, and they're just there to hold the fabric in place while I stitch across it. But what I did is thread. I forgot to talk about thread. I'm using mercerized cotton for these fabrics. It goes through more smoothly and just works better. It makes a better finish for the garment as well. When you're dealing with something like this, I will use basic polyester for knits all day long, because the way you do the hems and stuff is different because it's stretchy. So, but for this, I use a little bit higher end thread, and my bobbin now is still polyester, which I find works well, having this for the top and the polyester for the bottom. It just works well together, and it saves a little bit of money on thread, I guess, especially if you have to pull things out a lot like I do sometimes. And I have a different color that matches with the green in here for my top stitching. I just don't have a lot of it, so that's why I'm just using this white thread for some of my seams and such. All right, now I always turn my stitches up to the longest stitch, which is on mine at 5, compared to 2.5, which is a standard stitch size for the machine I have. And that way it makes it easier to pull out. I knot all the tails together on one end, and then on this end I knotted together the bottom threads because I'm going to pull the top threads. I always like to do a 2-row one, especially if you're making a really long pleat, like a pleated skirt or something. Well, not pleated, but a gathered skirt or something, and you have to go all the way around that. Sometimes I'll do 3 on that just to keep it from getting to a point where you break it. Okay, this one's very short, and if I'm doing something really long, I would gather from both sides towards the middle to make that a little easier. But since this is so short, I don't need to do that, and I don't have to gather it up too much. So that's, I mean, gathering stuff is basically the same for any fabric you use. I just the thread is what I change. So I will just push this like that until I get just a wee bit more. See, this one doesn't even take very much. Okay, so once I get it to a point where it's even with my other side, I want to adjust this so it's more even. I will tie off this end. I'll only do it one time just in case I need to adjust again. But this is what I do. Then I kind of space that out. Like I said, this is not a big gather. This is barely a gather, really. So it doesn't take much to get that evened up. Now, when I do a French seam, for those that don't know, you actually, instead of putting right sides together first, you put wrong sides together first. So I will put this together like this. And I'm going to stitch about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Okay. And then I'm going to flip it. I like to iron it just to make it a crisper thing to do. And then I'm going to stitch along the seam line. Okay. What that does is encase these ends within your seam so that you don't have anything exposed. I'm going to do that for the whole top. It gets a little bit trickier when you do the armholes. And I may or may, what I do if I'm going to do armholes and I'm going to do a French seam, I don't sew the side seams, which in this case, I don't sew the side seams, because normally if I'm insetting a sleeve and I'm not doing a French seam, I would sew front to back and then I inset the sleeve. But because I want to do a French seam, I'm going to leave that side seam open and I'm going to do the French seam on the sleeve, and then I'll sew the sides together doing a French seam, and that just makes it easier to get to, which I'll show you eventually. But first I'm going to go sew this and then show you how I flip it, and then sew it again, and so you can see what a French seam looks like. All right, I'll be right back. Okay, I wanted to show right quick my 1/8 of an inch approximately seam, and I have already flipped it and ironed my seam I ironed it towards this three. It doesn't really matter because it's gonna be folded. So you'd fold it like this, and now, but what you have to remember, I wanted to be sure to say, is that let's say this has a 1/2 inch seam. I've already sewn 1/8 of it, so I have to take 1/8 of an inch from 1/2 inch. So I would sew from this edge 3/8 of an inch to get my correct seam, okay? So that's something you got to do a little bit of math with that. And if you have a larger seam, you can do the first stitch more than 1/8. You could do 1/4. Like say you got 5/8, you could do 1/4 because then you still have a 3/8 inch to sew. There's probably a technique or something for French seams that's maybe accurate, or it needs to be this way to be professional or whatever, but I don't I don't follow those rules. So, but that's what I'll do. I'll sew from this folded edge 3/8 of an inch, and I'm going to hit it with iron one more time to make that nice and straight and make it a little bit easier to keep everything straight. So I'll be right back. Okay, now I have sewn my 3/8 of an inch from that edge, and when I flip it out, I have my seam sewn just like that. That picture really shows more of a gather than that, but it's, you know, it's not much. It's fine to me. And then everything's nice and finished on this side, so you don't have to worry about finishing those edges if you don't have a serger, like if you do the zigzag or whatever. The zigzag especially, I've done it before. I don't like it on these fabrics because they unravel too easily. And I did manage to catch all of my gathering stitches, so I don't have to worry about pulling those out. Just going to trim this up right here. So there we go. Now I just got to do the other side, but I wanted to show y'all right quick, and this will be the last thing for this particular tutorial. A little shorter today, but what I meant when I said that I'm gonna do hold on, let me get this thing laid out. Okay, this is the front. That's I'm on the wrong side. This is the collar. This is the sleeve. Okay. That's the other thing, to make sure you sew things correctly. I have sewn things a couple times backwards today already and had to redo this, but we don't want to do that again. Anyway, the collar, this is the sleeve. So what I was talking about before with the how I would put the sleeve in, I would leave it open like this. So typically I would go ahead and stitch up these side seams and then inset my sleeve, but I'm gonna sew it. I'm gonna match everything up. Well, I'll have to do it opposite, but I'll match everything up because one side of this is longer than the other side. So this goes here, and I pin it all around, and I sew my seam, and then do my French seam on it, and then do the side seam. Because if I sew this up and then I try to do the French seam, it just becomes more cumbersome, in my opinion. For me, it's easier to do this when I can with any sleeve, because I don't like to inset sleeves, but I will if it changes the look of the garment, and there's some things that it could. So, but for something like this, since it's so flowy and stuff, I'm going to sew it before I sew the side seam. Your instructions are probably going to tell you to sew the side seam before you put the sleeve in. Some pattern companies do, some pattern companies don't. But that's what I meant by saying that I'm going to do the sleeve before I do sew the side seams. But I needed this to be here before I could put the sleeve in. So, since I have to do wrong sides together, it'll go something like this. And, yep, you'll match up all your points and things to get it in there right. And then I'll do another tutorial on insetting sleeves, because I feel like that's a whole tutorial by itself. But I just wanted to show what I meant by doing my French seam this way first, then sewing side seam. Okay, I think I've said that enough times. But those are my tips for working with this. When I do the finish and the hem, I'll do another video because that is basically what I do. And I'm just going to tell you in this video is I sew a line, a stitch line, wherever I want to fold my hem up at, along the edge of it. And then I go and fold it along that stitch line. And for me, that makes it a lot easier with these types of fabric, because these types of fabric don't like to stay put. They have a lot of movement in them. And having that stitch line there helps hold the fabric kind of together. And then you can iron it. And I may, most of the time when I do hems, I'll iron it and then iron the other thing and then I stitch. But with these fabrics, I'll sew the stitch line, I'll flip it up, I'll put a stitch in there, and then I'll do the second fold. And then I'll stitch my finishing stitches on top of that. That just keeps things from coming apart. Like when you get down to the end, I don't know, or you get to a certain point and something didn't hold together right. You know, you can pin it if you want to, but I feel like doing that makes it faster in the long run, because you don't have to pin it, and also it's easier to keep an eye on keeping things straight as you sew along. Okay, so it's technically 3 rows of stitching, plus it reinforces that hem because it's so lightweight. It can come unraveled easier sometimes on these fabrics, and then stuff starts fraying and it's just not no fun. But anyway, I feel like I'm rambling on now at this point. But those are some of my tips for sewing with a Crinkle Challis. If I didn't answer something that you're particularly wanting to know about it, just let me know. I will do another video about setting in sleeves, and possibly on the same, or about how to attach the sleeve. Possibly on the same shirt, maybe a different shirt, we'll see. But look for my finished shirt in my stories, or whatever they call them here on YouTube. My little shorts, that's what they're called. I'll do a little short and show you my finished shirt. Like I said, if y'all have any questions, let me know down below. And y'all remember to have a life lived creatively. I will see you in the next video.